Mascot horror is a term coined to define a genre of horror games that are based around kids' properties. Let me explain to you. This video game genre puts a twist on childhood icons that turns evil. These childhood icons usually refer to animatronics, puppets, and toys. They will usually take place in locations that are associated with childhood, such as pizzeria restaurants, toy factories, or cartoon studios. Sometimes these games will also be associated with a specific holiday, such as Christmas or Halloween, to give a wonder-like experience to the player. Now, the term mascot horror has been coined recently, and it is mostly referred to as a negative stereotype in the horror game industry. People seem to not really enjoy this genre and think that it is more childish. And yes, I do agree. It is more to a childish-like horror, and there is nothing wrong with it. Horror itself is a very subjective genre. There's psychological horror, jump-scare horror, action horror, and all these categories are acceptable by the gaming community. I don't know about you, but I really enjoy every type of horror there is in games, and mascot horror should not be an exception. Anyways, in this video, I'd like to dive deep into why I think Bendy and the Ink Machine is a perfect example of the mascot horror genre. But before anything, let's dive deep into the early production of the franchise. Now, the idea of Bendy and the Ink Machine came from the creator, the Meatly, asking a question for a video game based around old cartoon sketches. During that phase of development, he soon realized the creepiness of these old animations. This most likely is referencing to experimental stages of early animation back in the 1900s. And of course, these animations were made as an extension of the artist's creativity. However, due to public backlash, most of these creepy animations were largely forgotten. You see what I'm getting at here? Proceeding along, the name Bendy actually comes from a typo mistake. It was when the Meatly was operating the software Blender when he accidentally typed out Bendy as a sort of save. Albeit, it was a rather good save. It's amazing how these accidental mistakes sometimes can birth out awesome outcomes. For example, we have Scott Cotton accidentally placing Bonnie right in front of the camera, and when he turned it on, he got the greatest scare of his life. Thus, created the legacy of FNAF. Surprisingly enough, the first chapter only took 5 days to complete. Can you believe it? Like, I need a week plus to edit all my videos. Anyways, originally being a quote-unquote for fun project, turns out to become a massive hit, spawning many streamers and content creators playing and reviewing the small indie game. Hence spawned the viral legacy of the hit Pentology series of Bendy and the Ink Machine. Now, we must ask the question, why does mascot horror work for this game? And what attracts people to the small indie game? There are tons and hundreds of games out there, but why Bendy? First of all, let's break it down. Bendy in its own original universe is a cartoon character that is meant to appeal to a wider audience, much like other cartoon characters. In a way, it is meant to have a distinct personality and characterization to it. Let's look into the design of Bendy. I would like you to pay attention to its color palette. It has two distinct colors, black and piss yellow. Anyways, these two colors complement each other. Let's look into Freddy for example, an animatronic mascot made for kids, arguably one of the most distinct horror villains today. Only has a simple color palette of only two colors, brown and black. Albeit you can kinda say light brown as the third one, but it's my video. You see, having a simple color palette works as it gives off an iconic and a simple way to recognize a character, as for this case, Bendy for its black and yellow color scheme. Now, one other thing I noticed is that Bendy is smiling. It's rather odd as not many horror villain characters smile. Most of them either have a fixed face, a dead-ass serious face, or no face at all. I'm looking at you from that head. Anyways, this also gives in an iconic presence and another simple nod to other cartoon characters as well. Let's say Gumball and Finn, the modern day cartoon characters. Cartoon Network's big names are also smiling. A smile can really give off a welcoming look, and it works well with Bendy. And it also contrasts with this other version of Bendy, which is dirtied up and covered with ink. I would also like to touch upon the gameplay. It does not really have a complicated gameplay mechanic, only revolving around picking up items, and using your weapons. There is no inventory mechanic and there is no health system. Some might say that this will bore them, while yes, it is kind of true that due to the lack of a challenge, it does not really provide a rather fun gameplay. But hey, this is not Silent Hill, this isn't Resident Evil. This simple gameplay mechanic offers a more peaceful way to enjoy the game, rather than constantly thinking of how to manage our inventory spaces. The puzzles in Bendy aren't so hard either, only the one song chapter in chapter 2 where I was completely confused. But it's simple and easy to learn. We should also not forget the cool stalker AI we got for Bendy in chapter 3, and also the projectionist too. This game is perfect to bring anyone into the horror game genre, as to ease them into the atmosphere and puzzles of a horror game. Now, lastly, I would like to reinforce the fact that this is a cartoon. Now, let's get back to the real world. Cartoons are made for kids. It is simply designed to be friendly. In other words, what I'm trying to say here is that when you are developing a mascot horror game, you cannot think that the only setting is when it is dark and haunted. You must also think of when things were bright and friendly, such as the first part of the trailer we got for FNAF, when we see the animatronics, well, being well and happy. How about for Tattletail trailer, where we see a vintage commercial of the toy? And as for Bendy, we get to see the simple old animations, just to show us what it was like before the ink demon took over. I'm gonna be honest, I'm pretty sure if Bendy were to be a real cartoon, or if Freddy Pizzeria were to even be real, or Tattletail toys were to even be produced, it surely would be a hit nonetheless. And besides, we even got merchandise for these respective franchises that are mainly aimed at, well, for kids. This can't be said for most horror game franchises like Silent Hill, Outlast and Resident Evil, since they are not built around these locations nor events. It goes to show how mascot horror can be a good introduction to horror to a new generation. As such, horror exposed to children at a young age can sometimes be beneficial to reduce a scare factor and make them be brave, as long as, well, no real graphical images are displayed. I personally was introduced to horror at a young age, and to be honest, I was more afraid of aliens than I was at ghosts. Thus, I believe that Bendy and the Ink Machine is a perfect example of a great mascot horror game. It is also a great introduction to horror to not only just kids, but to newcomers of the horror game genre as well, that just needs a little taste outside of their respective gaming genre. Trust me, you wouldn't want to give Resident Evil 7 to someone who loves Stardew Valley, but a mascot horror such as Bendy can really be the bridge between the two games. Maybe at one point in the future, I'll make a video discussing mascot horror games as a whole, but as for now, Bendy right here is one of the greatest mascot horror games out there.